Hi there, you are listening to the Guitar Speak podcast. My name is Matt Wakeling. Thank you so much for joining us today. Hey, we had great response to episodes 1 and 2 with Michael Dolce. Those episodes are still available, they're free. You can check them out, they're on SoundCloud, on iTunes. We're now on Stitcher, which is a great service, works great on Android as well as iOS. Now we're on Facebook, Guitar Speak Podcast, and that's a really great place to find some of the pictures we put up, some of the video links we put up that relate to our artists. So like us on Facebook and share it around. Now today I'm really proud to present an episode with a fantastic guitar player, best known for his fingerstyle acoustic work, but he plays a lot of other stuff besides that. I'm talking about Mr. Michael Fix. Now Michael is a multiple golden guitar winner, as we'll find out. He's one of the very few guitar players in the world that has been honoured by having Maton name a signature series guitar after him. That's the Michael Fix 808 model. We'll find out how that came about. Michael is a prolific tourer. Aside from touring all around his home nation of Australia, he's performed in South Africa, New Zealand, Japan, all around Asia, and since 2004 he's been making annual trips to Europe, where he has a massive following, particularly in Germany, but also all around the great continent of Europe. This September he's heading to Tuscany to run a guitar camp, and following that he's got a whole bunch of dates in Germany and more dates to come. Before we hear the interview with Michael, I thought we'd play part of his music. Here's one of his original compositions. In fact, it won him a Golden Guitar Award in 1999 for Best Instrumental. This is a piece called Mr. Wonglepong. Michael's also well known for tackling some really interesting covers. Check out this beautiful arrangement of David Bowie's Life on Mars. Mr. Michael Fix, welcome to the Guitar Speak podcast.
Yeah, thanks. Great to talk to you.
First up, Michael, what led you to the guitar?
It was Top 40 radio, I think, was the first inspiration at around the age of 11, and I guess it coincided with growing out of childhood and hitting puberty, and there was a guitar in the house, so I was sort of naturally drawn to the instrument anyway, because my dad played a little bit. He played a few chords and could play a few hits of the day. And but it wasn't until I discovered the dial on the radio that changed the station from our local. I grew up in Wollongong, and at one point I found or stumbled upon a station in Sydney called 2SM, and they were the sort of the hip and happening top 40 radio station at the time of the early. Yeah, and that just opened up another world, because until that point I'd really been influenced by what my parents were listening to at home, which like I suppose any kid would say about their parents of music of that era, it was a bit daggy and dated sounding. and suddenly I discovered the world of Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple, and it was also the beginning of the singer-songwriter era. So Cat Stevens and James Taylor, and there's a whole range of music that was totally new to my ear, and it all featured guitar, and whether it was electric guitar or acoustic guitar, it didn't matter to me. It was just the sound of that instrument that seemed to be so prominent on the airwaves that really touched me. And it was a particular song actually that hit the mark straight up, and that was 1971. It was Eagle Rock by Daddy Cool.
Oh, okay, yeah, and, awesome.
Yeah, and it was the sound of those Ross Wilson and Ross Hannaford, and those electric guitars coming out through a 2-inch AM radio speaker just hit me right in the chest, and that was really the beginning. And fortunately, I was very young, but I had some older brother figures in my life. So some older guys who were already playing guitar and who would show me stuff, and that pretty much set the pattern for the rest of my life. Is always look for people who are better than you, and don't be afraid to ask.
I've read that you're playing gigs by the time you're 12. You must have had a fairly quick learning curve to be performing. What sort of gigs were you doing at age 12?
Well, it was probably I think at age 13 was the first paid gig with my sort of garage band. Yeah. Of the time, bunch of school friends. It was a time, just to put it in context for the listeners, the 1970s, live music was so prominent and so important. It was everywhere. Every bar and club and restaurant and cafe and nightclub, everywhere was live music, and it wasn't that I was some kind of child genius. It was the fact that there was so much work around that even a bunch of school kids from age 13, 14, 15 years old could get some paying gigs. Wow. It's almost impossible to imagine these days.
Yeah, for sure.
But Wollongong is a very multicultural town, and I hooked up with a couple of school friends. They were older than me, and they were Italians, and they had connections to the local Italian community, and they would have regular dances, and we started getting booked to play their dances. It was a great way to meet girls too.
That's great. What kind of tunes were you playing at these gigs?
Sort of hits of the day. So some of the radio hits, but also music that was known as continental music, which was really music from the continent being Europe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So to play a lot of these wasn't just Italian dances. Later on, with Wollongong's multicultural community, there were clubs for every ethnic group. So I remember playing the German club, the Italian club, the Spanish club, the Portuguese club, wow. The Ukrainian club, and all these audiences had different tastes in music. So whatever band I was in, there would always be somebody in that band who was either Spanish or Italian, or would import music from the country. So it might be hits that were on the radio in Europe, but weren't really that well known here. So it certainly broadened my horizons to be playing in bands at that time.
Wow, that's a fantastic opportunity to not only get a band together at such a young age, but to be getting across such a broad range of material. And I guess from there, I can see, looking over your career, you've always had a very eclectic repertoire and with the bands and things you've done.
Yeah, eclectic and diverse is certainly a couple of ways of describing it. And it never occurred to me that that there was anything unusual about that. And later on in life, I started to think about my music as more of a career path, and I started to wonder, maybe I should be focusing on something. All the great players are known as, B.B. King is he's the blues guy, and you have every one seemed to have their thing, and I'm thinking, what's mine? You know, I seem to be all over the shop here. I'm playing in a rock band one night, and then I'm playing in a bossa novas in a cocktail bar the next night, and you know, all this created a little bit of confusion for me. But one of my ambitions in my late teens was to get into session work, and in the 1980s, recording sessions was still a very thriving business. So this was playing on commercials and playing on albums for other people. And they were always in the big studios. It was the before home studios.
Yeah, sure.
And it was really the place where you know, the people that I perceived as being the really accomplished players were the guys doing the sessions. And I thought I was well suited for that life, not because I considered myself accomplished, but because I had such a broad experience of music. And I figured, gee, if somebody books me for a Latin American session or a rock session or acoustic or electric, whatever it is, I've kind of had some experience in it. And I did actually get into that world and really enjoyed it. And it's still a part of what I do these days, and I still love it. People are often very surprised because I'm kind of known now as the acoustic guitar guy. But I can people get surprised if they find out, you know, I've played, be it banjo or be it, you know, some heavy rock guitar or whatever it is. That's
Awesome.
It's all been part of my experience.
Great. So, so when you were still in Wollongong in your late teens, when did you move to Sydney? Was that to pursue more gigs and more sessions?
I moved up to Sydney when I turned 21. And by that time I was sort of travelling to Sydney fairly regularly. I kind of knew that I had to get out of Wollongong, and I was very curious about what was going on in the wider world. And back in those days, it seemed like it was only 90 kilometres, but it seemed like such a big step. But I hooked up with Tommy Emmanuel and started to have some. They were kind of lessons. When I say kind of lessons, they were really we would get together, and he would just play stuff for me, and I would be just totally bowled over and record everything and and you know try and learn stuff that way.
So this is the early 80s. I'm sort of guessing. Yeah. So how did you come in contact with him in the first place?
There was a venue in Sydney called the Musicians Club. In Cleveland Street, I think. It was I know it. Fantastic venue, and I started going regularly. It just seemed like a sensible thing to do if you're going to meet musicians. Just go to a musicians club.
Of course.
There was fantastic bands, and one night there was a group playing Doug Parkinson and the Southern Star Band.
Oh, okay, yep.
And that's the first time I saw Tommy play. He was playing electric guitar.
Okay.
And I instantly heard a whole bunch of sounds and influences that were new to me. And as I found out later, you know, Tommy was, when he was improvising, that he was bringing in a bit of Django, a bit of Joe Pass, a bit of George Benson. There's all this stuff that was kind of pretty new and fresh for me.
Okay, yep.
And but what knocked me out was when the band took a break, he came out on stage with an acoustic guitar and sat down and played a couple of Beatles tunes.
Oh, great.
Just unaccompanied. And that was a sort of a big light bulb moment for me. It was, up until that point, my experience of solo acoustic guitar was more the classical world.
Okay, yep.
And then to see somebody playing the music that I loved, like some, you know, Beatles music, and seeing the way the audience reacted to that, it was... It kind of the light bulb came on, and it was like, hey, this is what I could do with my life. This is where I'm heading. You know, it was in that time of all the trying to figure out what my path was going to be, and it really started at that night in the Musicians Club.
Wow, fantastic. So you ended up, you took some lessons, or like I've heard Tommy described as a mentor to you. Would you see it that way?
Yeah, I would say a mentor or another older brother figure. Tommy's 3 years older than me, And by that stage, when he was in his early 20s, he already had such a huge range of experience and so many songs and so many gigs under his belt. And he kind of he encouraged me to move to Sydney. I stayed with him for a little while I found my own place to live. So we ended up living quite close to each other.
Okay.
And I would drive him around to sessions. So he would introduce me to some of the producers, and and the whole time he's practicing and playing and showing me stuff, and we're jamming, and it's just incredibly inspiring time. And of course it was that era in my life when I wasn't married, I didn't have kids, I didn't have a mortgage.
Yeah.
I just had tons of time to dedicate to the guitar. So, I was constantly inspired, but I also had all the time and energy to put into it.
So is that when you started, like finger style on a steel string? Did you jump over to that?
Yeah. I got into he introduced me to the music of Chet Atkins.
Okay. Yeah.
And Jerry Reed and those sort of guys, and that was all brand new. But when I heard that style and I realized the potential and what I could do with it, I just got totally hooked. And Tommy had hundreds of records, and he would lend me the records, and I'd go away and just play for 12 hours a day and learn pieces, and then I'd go back and play them for him, and then he'd show me all the stuff I was doing wrong. And so it took quite a while. I mean, fingerstyle, that sort of Chet Atkins thing, it's a very sophisticated technique, and it took quite a while before I had the confidence to sort of put a set together. But I was playing a lot. I was playing in bands and in duos, and I would take any opportunity to play a piece solo just to get that feeling, and see how I was traveling with that.
Yeah. So had you been? You mentioned classical guitar was your sort of first reference to solo acoustic guitar. Were you playing classical guitar before this time?
I had played a little bit. In my teenage years, I had a guitar teacher. It's a regular Thursday afternoon half-hour guitar lesson.
Yeah.
He was a great teacher. He was a jazz guy, and he also played classical. And he took me through some pieces. So I dabbled in it, like I did with so many things. I sort of dabbled in it. But I realized that the classical guitar world is a very, very disciplined world, and I knew I couldn't stick at it. There were too many other sounds and influences that were calling me.
Okay, awesome. So I guess then that was the whole experience with Tommy and digging into Chet Atkins. That was probably your first serious go at, I guess, working on independent parts and sort of polyphonic kind of approach. That's awesome. So in I think it was 1984 you joined the band Hat-Trick. Is that true?
Yeah, that's right.
Cool. And what kind of material were you doing there?
Well, that was a band playing a very eclectic mix of stuff, so it really suited me very well. There were two violins in the band, and the band had a repertoire that consisted of sort of Celtic rock, Steel Eye Span and Fairport Convention, but also classical pieces, the sort of classical chartbuster ones that everybody knows, the Mozart, Brahms, Beethoven, Bach, but done in a kind of a rock style. It was guitar, bass and drums and two violins. And it was a really fun band to play in. The music was often quite complex, but it was always fun, and it was very unique and different, and the audiences connected with particularly with the classical stuff, because we do it with a lot of humor as well. To me, my philosophy is still to this day, the genre doesn't matter to me. If there's a melody and there's a groove, that's it. I'm there, and so it never bothered me if it was classical or if it was heavy rock or whatever it was. There had to be a melody there, and there had to be some kind of groove, and there's great classical composers, they knew how to write a great tune.
Yeah, definitely.
And we would sort of rock them up a bit and
Nice.
have a bit of fun with the arrangements.
That's cool. I often think of Beethoven as like a riff writer. He would often write very short riffs and sequence
Yeah,
them for forever, but they'd be these very heavy kind of riffs. Were you playing
yeah,
electric or acoustic in Hat Trick?
both.
Okay, yeah, cool.
Yeah,
And what
and
sort of gear were you running back then?
what sort of gear?
Yeah, what was your rig?
I was playing a Fender Telecaster
Hmm.
and a Fender amp, and just a few basic pedals, a tube screamer and a delay pedal and Boss chorus, the sort of pretty standard sort of stuff for the time. And as far as acoustic guitars, I hadn't gotten into the Matons at that stage, and it was still very difficult to find an acoustic guitar that amplified really well, that also sounded good acoustically. So I was playing a kind of a semi-hollow body acoustic guitar made by Ibanez,
Oh, okay, yeah.
sort of a very thin body guitar, which had virtually no acoustic sound, but
Okay, yeah.
amplified reasonably well, and you could get it quite loud.
Without feedback and
Yeah,
sure.
and that. So this is in the 80s, and then Takamine came in, and they probably had the first, or Ovation and Takamine had the first sort of half-decent pickup systems, but they still weren't that suitable for rock gigs, and it was pretty common in that era to see people with their Takamine guitars absolutely stuffed full of cotton wool or felt or something like that.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until about 1990 that I got my first Maton, and they just came out with this new pickup system, and it was the first guitar that I thought, this is a guitar I can take to a recording session, but I can also use it on stage.
You've ended up with your own Maton signature model, weren't you? So you're in a very select band of musicians. That's based on the 808 model, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's an 808 with a cutaway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. And what did when did that happen? You'd probably been playing Matons for some time then. When did they approach you about making a signature model?
In 2003, I hooked up with a guy called Alan Saman, who was at the time the Maton distributor in Italy. So he'd set up a company in Italy, and as part of promoting the guitars, he was bringing Australian guitar players over. So he had Tommy went over and did a tour in Italy, and I think even Phil Emmanuel went as well. And in 2004, he invited me to go over, which basically meant going and doing some workshops in music stores and playing at a few guitar festivals, and sitting on the stand and demonstrating and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, right.
So he asked me in 2003 if I'd be interested to do that, and I said yes, of course. And then he said, "Well, why don't we see if we can get a signature guitar that we can be promoting as well?" So that's the idea. Sort of came from Alan Saman. So he spoke to Maton, and they contacted me, and so the idea was the model was delivered in time for my first Italy tour, and so they could introduce me and the Maton guitars and the signature model guitar.
Right, fantastic.
At the same time, so it was a kind of a marketing move as well.
Sure.
It worked really well because this model guitar is a really good seller in Europe. So Matons are quite hard to find and quite expensive in Europe because of the dollar difference.
Sure. Yes.
But the people who are really keen on them, they tend to be the pro or semi-pro players, and they'll buy either the Tommy Emmanuel model or the Michael Fix model.
That's great. That's fantastic.
So it's a total buzz as I'm traveling around in Europe and have people coming out for me to sign their guitars, and brilliant.
Wow. Fantastic. And it's obviously gone well because Maton are still running that line, so that's been part of their lineup for quite a while now. That's fantastic.
Yeah, since 2004.
Great. Now, speaking of 2004, we've sort of jumped ahead a couple of decades, so I might backtrack shortly. But was that the start of building your overseas audience? Because since around that time, it seems like you've built up quite a following in Europe.
Yeah, it really started with that first tour in Italy, and the breakthrough came when I decided I would fly over to Germany, because from where I was in Italy into Germany was only like an hour flight, and primarily to visit some relations, some relatives that I hadn't seen for many, many years, who live in Germany. Okay. in a town called Dortmund, and if this is only just a few months before the trip, and I'm sitting here at home thinking to myself, well, I'm going to be in Germany, I'm going to have all my gear with me, so I should see if I can find a gig. So I did a bit of Googling and discovered that on the exact weekend that I was going to be in Dortmund, there was a guitar festival in that town, and not only that, but the headliner was Tommy.
Fantastic. So, how's the timing?
The timing, unbelievable. So, to cut a long story short, Tommy invited me to play on his show. The festival organizer gave me a few gigs as well at very short notice, and it was really it was like anywhere, I guess, a community of people who were into a particular style of music, like acoustic fingerstyle guitar. Yeah. There were a lot of festival and event organizers at that festival, and they saw me play, and afterwards it was like, well, if you're ever coming back to Germany, here's my card. I run a little festival here, or I run a venue there.
Great.
And I just built the whole Germany network from this one festival, and it's just keeps growing. And that's 12 years ago, and I was making 2 trips a year. Wow. Yeah, it's been great.
It's cool. Like on your website, it asked the viewers of your website, do you want the English site or do you want the Deutsch site? So
yeah,
good to see. So I have jumped ahead a little bit, so probably about 20 years or so. So your solo career probably started early 90s, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
So from that, I guess Hat Trick was sort of the mid 80s. So you were developing your solo work. What else was happening around that time?
The 80s was really was Hat Trick. It was a 6-night a week gig. Wow. That went right through to the end of the 80s. And in the daytime, I was doing some sessions, and Hat Trick we were doing our own recordings as well. It was the very beginning of the home studio thing, so I was starting to get into that, and bought an 8-track tape machine and some gear, and sort of set up a studio at home, and I started writing music. My first sort of attempts at original compositions that was in the 80s as well. So that was kind of quite an important time.
Yeah. And you were touring with Graham Connors for a while in the 90s?
Yeah, that came then after Hat Trick finished up around about 1990. I think in the same year, I got a call from singer-songwriter Graham Connors, who he was already getting quite well known as a songwriter, and some of the sessions that I'd been doing, people were recording Graham Connors songs, and of course he happened to hear them, and then I got a call from him out of the blue one day. I didn't really know who he was, and he said, "I've heard you play guitar. You've played on." Listed a number of songs, and said, "I'm the guy that wrote them, and I'm putting a band together, and I'm going on tour."
That's great.
And it was a really good time for Graham. He had an album out called North that was very popular, and he had a bit of a television profile as well, and so the sort of jumped straight into this kind of touring concert band. We were playing Queensland, particularly. They were the largest gigs. They were like entertainment centre style gigs.
Yeah.
So it was a really great experience to be playing in that theatre concert environment. And when I released my first album in 91 or 92, and Graham gave me the opportunity to present a couple of pieces solo during the show. So
that's great.
That kind of really kicked me off.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think before you know it, you're collecting Golden Guitar Awards for Instrumental of the Year. I think I believe you got 3 of those. Yeah. I started recording in 91, and so each year I would, because of the connection with the country music scene through Graham. Yeah, I sort of got to know some people and learned how it all works, and I started entering tracks into the awards each year. Mm-hmm. And so I was a finalist for about, I think, 8 years in a row, and before I won the first Golden Guitar, and that was in 99. Okay, so it was an overnight success that took 10 years.
Yeah, I had to pay my dues in Tamworth.
Yeah, fair enough. I think Keith Urban's the only other musician to have three Golden Guitars for the best instrumental track. So that's
cool the strange thing about Keith's is that 2 of those were for the same track. But,
oh, really?
Yeah, it's a little controversial there.
Yeah, wow. Well, I guess the awards have they've always had a bit of controversy somewhere. So
yeah.
So you've got 3 outright tracks. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And that's a peer award, isn't it? It's not like a a popular vote, is it? It's your peers in the industry voting, so that must be a pretty special thing.
Yeah. It certainly was. It was a great sense of anticipation as each year rolled by, and missed out again. But yeah, it was very cool, and that was a really great era of country music in Australia too, and the profile and exposure of country music artists was high, and the awards were being televised and all this sort of thing.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of momentum. Those people, 90s, like James Blundell, Lee Kernaghan, Garth Porter was, I think, just kicking in as a producer. And
yeah, that's right.
Cleaning up. So yeah, brilliant. I was wondering if we could talk about your technique for a little while. Have you always used a thumb pick when you're, particularly with your solo acoustic stuff? That seems to be important. I didn't start using a thumb pick until I was in my early 20s, and got hooked into the music of Chet Atkins. So you really need it for that stuff.
Yeah, it was very much a part of the sound and style, and I wanted to make it authentic. And it took a long time to get comfortable with a thumb pick, a very long time, in fact. But now it feels pretty comfortable. But I'll often, depending on what's required, I'll play just fingerstyle without a thumb pick, or sometimes flat picking as well, which is kind of how I started playing.
Okay, yep. So
I mixed it up.
Sure. So with the flat picking, I guess you'd employ some hybrid picking, so you're picking...
Yeah, it really comes down to, the choice comes down to what sort of attack I want on a note. So if I'm playing something like bluegrass, for example, I actually feel more comfortable playing it fingerstyle. I've got a better facility and can play cleaner and faster fingerstyle, but you need the attack on the notes that you get from a pick. So fingerstyle doesn't sound, if you want an authentic bluegrass sound, it's not quite the right sound.
Yep.
And if I want a very warm, jazzy sort of sound, I'll just go, totally naked flesh.
Yeah, sure.
It's a much softer attack on the strings. Yeah, so I was going to say, I've sort of built up calluses when I'm playing a lot. I've got calluses on the fingertips, and I can manipulate that a little bit too. So by curling my finger around a bit, I can catch more of the callus and have more attack on the note.
Yeah, cool. I mean, it's great to have all those things in your arsenal. And I've seen some of you playing when, again, if you're on a thumb pick, sometimes you'll just clamp down on it like a flat pick if you're doing really kind of fast stuff. I think like in Toccata, for example, is that a flat pick for that, I think? And
that's a thumb pick I'm using in that.
Sorry, a thumb pick, yeah, and then you just grab on when you're doing those really fast alternate picking sort of things. how do you go about choosing or arranging new pieces? Because you've got pieces that sort of live in the guitar's repertoire, but more often than not, you're pulling stuff from outside. So, like you're doing pop tunes, you're doing Beatles songs, classical
Yeah.
repertoire. How do you have a method? Do you have some?
Yes, I do. Yeah, it's a good question, and it is something I think about when I'm choosing a repertoire. As I said earlier, melody. Something's got to have a strong melody, got to have a groove, and there is a third element when I'm choosing a tune, and that is, has this been done to death, or are a lot of my peers doing the same tune?
Yeah.
Because if they are, I'm sort of always looking to do something that's a little bit outside the box, a little bit unexpected and original. So I'll often we'll jump onto YouTube if I think of a tune and go, this would be great. I'd love to do an arrangement of whatever it is, particularly a Beatles song, because everyone's done those.
Sure.
And I'll have a bit of a look on YouTube to see if any of the players who are on the touring circuit have covered it and have a definitive cover of it. And if they do, then I kind of stay away from it and I think, okay, that person's known for that arrangement. It's a bit like Carter is kind of my arrangement, and I'm only aware of one other player who's performing it, and they're not sort of touring on the circuit that I'm touring on. So it's sort of my thing, and helps differentiate me. And another one, for an example, just a recent example, I've just put together an arrangement of MacArthur Park with it's a Jimmy Webb song. It was a hit for Richard Harris in the 60s. It's like an epic orchestral thing.
Yes.
And I've always wanted to do it. It's very complex. And before I'm going to spend that amount of time, let's just have a look if anybody else has done it. And to my surprise, I couldn't find anyone else who's covered that tune. Well, not on YouTube anyway. So I felt comfortable that when I go out there and play it, people aren't going to sit there and go, "Oh, I saw so and so play that," or "I saw Tommy play it."
Yeah.
I kind of like to have a sense of I'm doing something that's a little bit different.
Sure. Do you delve into alternate tunings to make a song work better? Some of the clips I've seen of you and some of your performances I've seen, you seem to be in standard for a lot of the time. Do you ever tweak the tuning?
I do. A common one that I use is the E string down a tone to D.
Yep.
And
so for toccata, that's like perfect, hey?
Sorry?
For toccata,
like
that's
toccata,
perfect,
yes.
the D minor
Exactly.
tune, yeah. Okay.
But I won't go too far into open tunings. Mainly, the reason is a very practical one, in that when I'm touring, I'm generally traveling with one guitar.
Yeah, okay.
And I'm very conscious of standing on stage, tuning in between songs, and then having to tune back up again.
Yeah, sure.
Which is, if you're playing for a guitar crowd, they understand what's going on. But if you're playing for the general public, or the wives of the guitar players will sit there and go, "What's wrong with his guitar? He's always fiddling around with it."
It's broken.
It's a very stagecraft thing for me. So if I do have a thing like an arrangement of Bolero, which is an open tuning, and I sometimes
I heard that. I was wondering how you're doing that.
Yeah, so in a gig, I might save that I'll either open a set with it, so I only have to tune once when I'm finished, or I'll use it as an encore piece so I can rush off the stage, detune the guitar off stage, and come back on.
Okay, yeah, fantastic. How are you tuning your guitar for that piece?
That's C, G, from low to high, C, G, C, G, B, E.
Wow, that's cool. It's like a C major 7.
C major 7, yeah, exactly. So the top 3 strings are standard. The bass strings are C, G, C.
Okay, so you got some kind of familiar. Well, I mean, obviously you work up the piece, but you got some familiar. Territory up top, and then great. I think it's beautiful. I think tuning down to C, it's such a beautiful sound if your guitar is up for it. Do you use heavier? I guess if you're only on one guitar, you stick to a string gauge. What gauge would you use?
I'm using 12 to 53s.
Okay, yep. And they get down to C okay?
Yeah, but I have to. I play with a slight mute on the bass strings all the time.
Oh, okay.
I've only discovered this fairly recently that it's such an integral part of my technique. I've nearly always got part of the palm of my hand is resting on the bass string, sometimes really, really lightly.
Yeah.
But that way I can also get the action of the guitar very low, and you don't really hear the buzzing because I'm just dampening the whole thing a little bit.
Sure.
And I think it's come out of playing amplified, playing through big PA systems where it's really easy for everything to just kind of get away from you.
Yeah, yeah. Especially that bottom end. Hey, that's the that's the boom that can take off. What do you Cool. So you've got the muting. What other techniques have you used to amplify the guitar, like to make it actually work in a big loud room? Are you always using the PA, or do you use your own amps when you can?
I use my own amp as a monitor.
Okay. Yep.
It's an AER, and it's just a really great little amp to have on stage, and it's very comfortable and secure to have my own sound, and I can just run a cable out at the back of that straight into the PA, so it serves as a DI box as well. So I treat it like a monitor.
Yeah, cool.
And it's really great for those situations where, say you're playing at a festival and you have fairly short changeover times.
Mm-hmm.
And I discovered early on that a lot of the festival sound guys, they might be sort of rock and roll sound guys. They'll tune the monitors for a vocal.
Okay, yeah.
So it'll have a lot of bass and a lot of treble,
yeah.
and not a lot of mid-range. But the acoustic guitar needs mid-range.
Yeah, that's where it is.
Yeah, so instead of wasting time with the monitors, I've got my monitor on stage. All I have to do is turn it up and tell them that's the signal I'm giving them.
Yeah.
Just turn that up. That's
Great.
the sound.
That's easy. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was interested to see last year your son Adrian joined you on a European tour. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. My son Adrian is and he's at a point where he was wondering. He was keen to do music, but wasn't sure whether the whole sort of lifestyle of being a musician was going to work for him.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, "Well, come on tour and find out." So he had quite a nice sort of deluxe Europe tour, and he was playing percussion.
That's a good way to ease into it.
Yeah. There's no years of playing smelly pups for him.
No sticky carpets.
Exactly. He came. It was a 10-week tour. It was quite a long, grueling tour, and he did great. I really loved having him on stage and having that sort of. He's a very natural, intuitive percussionist, and he feels time and tempo exactly the same way that I do. So he's extremely comfortable, and I miss him a bit now. When I'm playing, it took me a little while to readjust.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's cool. Wow.
Yeah, he decided that the lifestyle wasn't for him. He's gone back to uni.
Okay, yeah. But that must be a pretty special time to share as a father and a son to be able to.
To
do something like that.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So what's on for the rest of 2016? I see you've got a bunch of gigs and collaborations coming up.
Yeah. I love working with singers. I suppose when it comes down to it, my passion is songs. I just love songs, and when I meet a singer who can really sing, that's a great scenario, and I love being in that supportive role. I've always loved being a rhythm guy, mm-hmm. and so I'm hooking up with a lady from the Isle of Man, Christine Collister. We're doing some gigs throughout April as a kind of a bit of a trial, because we'd like to. Our plan is to push this a bit further next year and do some festivals, but we're just doing some fairly low-key gigs just to get the repertoire together and get it off the ground, and it's working great. She was a singer with Richard Thompson in the 80s. She's got an amazing voice. And then in June, I'm hooking up with an old buddy of mine, a guy called Darren Coggan, who singer-songwriter, but has come from a very theatrical background, putting together shows that have done very, very well as an actor. He's also a TV presenter. But he's a great singer and a great player, and we have a lot of shared sort of musical interests and musical history. So we're putting together a show and basing it on some of our favourite music. So there's going to be Beatles, there's going to be Cat Stevens, there's going to be Jimmy Webb songs, it's Bruce Springsteen, all our sort of pick the eyes out of our favourites and arrange it for two guitars and two voices.
Great. Sounds like fun.
Yeah, and then there's the solo tour in Europe again. That's always in September, October.
Yep. Did I read correctly? You're running a guitar camp in Tuscany in September?
Yeah. That's going to be the beginning of that tour. That's
Cool.
with two great players. Andrea Valeri. He's been to Australia a couple of times. He's
Okay.
a wonderful young talent. And Adam Rafferty, who is a New York jazz guy who's gotten into the fingerstyle guitar world. He's got quite a unique approach as well. So the three of us are presenting this workshop, and we can speak English, German, and Italian between the three of us. So.
You should pull a lot of gigs. You should be fine between you guys. That's great. You do a lot of guitar clinics.
Yeah, it's an increasingly important part of what I do, and very enjoyable too. I really like sharing knowledge, and I like the idea of being able to hand back some of the stuff that's been, or all of the stuff that's been shown to me over the years, and some of the accumulated wisdom, if I have any.
I guess on that note, I'd encourage everyone to check out your website. Is that michaelfix.com?
That's the one.
That's the one, yeah. And there's stacks of great stuff on there, stacks of great clips and resources and performances and things. So,
yeah, and I've got a newsletter sign-up box, and if you add your email address, you get an MP3 and a tab of a blues piece that I've written that I use as an exercise in my clinics. So,
oh, fantastic!
Yeah.
Great. Well, yeah, that sounds like a great resource for guitarists to get stuck into. Fantastic. All right. So, Michael, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great.
It's great to talk to you.
Thanks, Michael.
Catch you later on.
So there you have it. That's the Guitar Speak interview with Michael Fix. I really enjoyed speaking to Michael. Really great guy, really great, amazing guitar player. Has built a fantastic career over many, many years and is still going strong. You should definitely check out his website, michaelfix.com. Heaps of good stuff on there, not least of all the dates of his gigs and clinics, access to all his recordings, and he's got a really cool YouTube channel as well, Michael Fix TV. Michael's going to play us out with his track Silvertop Blues. It's the music you're hearing right now. It's from his 2014 album Lines and Spaces. So thanks for joining us at the Guitar Speak podcast. Remember, you can find us on SoundCloud, iTunes. We're on Stitcher, Facebook. You can email us, guitarspeakpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. Okay, see you next time.